Hey guys, so what we have here is a trash picked lawnmower. This was my neighbor's. He was throwing it out, and it has a Briggs and Stratton Quantum engine, 190 cc's. A little bit of history. He's had it about 10, 11 years. Has never changed the oil in it. Has used it, I don't know, maybe 25 to 30 hours a year or so. So it might have, 200-300 hours on it, which is about the expected life of these units. So it's missing a lot of parts. It's missing a carburetor. Someone's already been through it. So I think what we'll do is we'll take it apart and we'll see what kind of shape it's in near the end of its service life. Is it still good? Is it bad? What's bad? How bad is it? So I think the first thing we're going to do is a compression check, and to do that, I want to get this shroud off so we can get access to the flywheel, so we can turn it with a drill. I mean, maybe I'll try to just stick a gauge on there and see what happens. Let's try that first. So normal on these engines is maybe, I don't know, between 80 and 100 psi. So let's see what this one's got. So first just got to take the plug out. It's got one of those fancy aftermarket ones. Well, maybe not aftermarket, but fancy gapped one. And I'm going to use my trusty OTC 5606 compression testing kit. You can pick these up on Amazon. So we're going to find the appropriate adapter that fits in the spark plug hole. I believe it's this one. Yep. Look at that, I got it right the first try. And when you're doing these tests, you want to make sure the throttle is wide open. And obviously without a carburetor, the throttle is going to be wide open. And you just pull the cord until it maxes out. So we'll give her a couple tugs. Okay, after a couple tugs, we're, I don't know, maybe, let's see, what is that, 90, maybe 95 psi or so. So this engine's not in terrible shape. Hopefully you guys can see that gauge. I just made it worse for you. Well, take my word for it. It's about 95. So in terms of the sealing capacity of the rings and the condition of the bore, probably not too tragic. Which is kind of surprising, because these engines are really throwaway engines. They're designed with aluminum cylinder bores. They don't have any fancy, the word I'm looking for. I don't think they have any fancy sealing surfaces on the valve seats. So they're really a throwaway engine. So now that we know that it seems like it's in decent shape, let's pull it apart and see what it looks like on the inside. Let's have a gander at the oil first. Again, I don't think it's ever been changed, it's just been added to. And for being 10 years old, I don't think that's tragically bad. But we'll see. Maybe it's become an oil burner. Alright, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the engine off the mower, kind of clean it off outside a bit, then get it up on the bench behind us so we're not dealing with an ugly, messy mess here. It's always nice to take apart clean equipment. So yes, I'll take it off the mower, clean it off, and then we'll get it on the bench, and then we'll disassemble it. So we got the engine off the mower. I went outside and I cleaned it up real good with Simple Green just so we weren't working with a disgusting mess. So this is it in all of its glory. Fairly complete, except as you see for the carburetor. So first step is to take off this adapter here, and for that we're going to use a puller. Reason why we need to take this off, we won't be able to get this sump cover off until we take off this adapter. So go get a puller and we'll yank that off. This is my go-to puller for just about everything that'll work on it. It's an OTC 7311. I got it a long time ago. I used it to pull everything from, I don't know, Pitman arms off steering gearboxes to little stuff like this. It's a very strong and durable puller. The jaws are forged. I mean, this thing is almost indestructible. So as long as it fits, it'll pull it. That's kind of the motto I've been following. So it looks like we'll fit nicely here. So I'm just tightening the jaws around the flange here. I have this bolt, crankshaft bolt, turned in a couple threads. Hopefully we don't need a spacer. We might. Yeah, I think we're going to. Yeah, I'm just about out of thread, so we'll go to spacer. Now it should just be a simple matter of tightening these jaws if I had the right size socket. Seven eighths. You can see it just slides off. Almost no effort for this. It's pretty easy. You can see the fresh crankshaft right there. So highly recommend this puller if you ever need one. Now you notice this crankshaft end is pretty rusty. What I like to do is I like to take a piece of sandpaper and clean it up, because a lot of times you don't have a step down. By step down I mean the crankshaft inside the main bearing is a larger diameter than this, so this rusted portion will never touch the main bearing, but I don't feel a real big step down here, so I'm just going to clean this up just so this very nasty rusty section doesn't damage that bearing. Not that it really matters in this case, but it's just a good practice to do that if you don't feel that big step down. And to clean it up, pretty easy, just do this. You could take a wire wheel too, and that'd be a lot faster. But this is all you really need to do. Sandpaper, emery cloth, whatever you have on hand. Pretty easy. Okay, I got the shaft cleaned up a bit. Now I'm going to flip it over, this end up, and we're going to take off the sump cover bolts. I'm going to do it that way because I did not drain the oil out of this deliberately. I wanted to get a sense of what we're dealing with and seeing the oil in the sump. So I'm going to flip it over and then we'll buzz these off with the good old impact driver. Okay, 3/8 socket. That's it. I think all the bolts are the same length. We'll see though. Yep, they are. This one up here was coated in oil though, so I wonder if that one, that's an open hole into the block. If it is, and you want to put thread sealant on that one and put it back together. I'll take a rubber mallet, tap on this. Should come right apart. There we go. Not too much fuss and bother. Let's squirt a little oil on there. Some a little more persuasive. so typical Briggs and Stratton nonsense. I'll get you guys a closer look. Plastic cam gear. Some Sump isn't too bad. Some nastiness in there. Not a lot of metal, but there definitely is some. Well, I guess what would you expect? You never change the oil. All that metal's got to go somewhere, right? To give you guys a better picture. So, quick tour. This is your oil slinger slash governor. So when the engine speeds up, this plastic gear is driven off of the cam here. So as the engine speeds up, this turns faster and actuates this governor arm here that slows the engine up, or slows the engine down, or speeds it up. That controls the butterfly in the carburetor. So this thing just pops right off, like so. Don't see any obvious damage to it. All the gear teeth are intact. This mechanism works as it should. You guys couldn't see that, I realized. Sorry about that. So the gear teeth look okay. This mechanism operates smoothly. What likes to happen on a lot of these engines is this cam gear. It either gets eaten up or the gear slips off, the plastic gear slips on the metal shaft, and then you lose the timing. Doesn't happen too often, but I've heard of it happening a few times. Also, it looks like the lobes are plastic. Geez, what crap. Come on. Let's dump this oil out just so we can get a better view of what's inside of there without worrying about making a mess. Okay, got all the oil drained out, or most of it anyway. So let's take our cam out. Take our lifters out. Let's take a look at the cam. Clean it off with a paper towel. So I don't see any obvious visual signs of wear on the teeth. I'll take a closer look at those with a magnifying glass. Let me go grab one. So I got my little magnifying glass here. Cleaned it off real good with some mineral spirits. And the gear teeth, for having meshed with, I realize you guys probably can't see this too well. But for the gear teeth having meshed with meshed with the steel gear for this many hours and this many years, they look remarkably good. The cam lobes are definitely a little bit worn because they are plastic as well, so which is not too surprising. They don't look tragic though. Overall, so far so good. I was kind of expecting to see this gear loose here or something, but no, it's tight. The lifters, as you would expect, are fine. No obvious wear on the face here. The contact's a plastic. Actually, there's a little bit of galling right there on that one. But you wouldn't expect a whole lot of wear, primarily because they're hitting plastic parts. And obviously this steel is harder than the plastic. I mean, they're not terribly high-end parts. Subject. Looks like maybe like a powdered metal part. I really need to improve the lighting in here. So yeah. All right, now I think we're going to take I'm going to take the cylinder head off and pop the piston out so we can see what the condition of the cylinder bore is, and also the piston rings. That's kind of where I'm expecting things to change condition a little bit. So I got the top tin off. Hopefully you guys can see a little bit better. Now I'm going to just pop these cylinder head bolts off with a 1/2 inch socket. They're not even that tight, wow. They probably could have been stand to have been tightened up. Take all these bolts out. Set them aside. Cylinder head off, like so. Not tragic. A little bit of carbon buildup, but again, I mean, this thing's 11 years old. I don't know what much more you'd expect. It's a residential grade machine. There's a bit of a ridge in there. Kind of what I would expect for this engine. Maybe you guys can get a better view that way. Let's blow that out with some compressed air. Put a little bit of water in there when I washed it. Of course, the flywheel brake is on, making this a lot more interesting. So let's continue to take this apart. I'm going to take off this bracket, take the flywheel brake off so we can turn the crank freely. Okay, got that bracket off. Going to take the flywheel brake off. A couple little 5/16 bolts here. Just be careful, there's a fairly strong spring there with some tension on it. You can release the ignition kill wire, just pressing down on this tab and yanking the wire out. Could probably take the coil off now. Tiny bolts that hold it on, wow. We'll do that in a little bit. Let's take the muffler off, because that's going to need to come off to do any further real inspections. Whoops! Oh, lost my tools. So with these, there are these tabs that lock these bolts from turning. Just pop them out of the way with a screwdriver, like so. Like so. I think it's a 1/2 inch. It's 7/16. 7/16. Man, it's hot in here. Jeez. Welcome to South Florida in July. I need to install a window AC in here. Okay, muffler is off. This is that auto choke system. I guess it uses some kind of a thermal. Is it thermal? What is this? I don't know how this thing works. There's a little doohickey here. It looks like it's built into the exhaust port. This actuates a vane that actuates the choke on the carburetor. I wonder how that works. We'll dig into that later. For now, let's just pop it off if it can. There we go. Maybe it's some kind of like thermal coupling. I don't know. Something to look into. Okay, so we should be able to turn the flywheel free. Let's get this governor linkage off. It's driving me crazy. Okay, that's off. So now we're down to almost just a bare block. Got a cam gear here this is the gear that drove those plastic teeth. Come on, focus. Focus. Might be the best we're going to get. Alright, I think it's time to take Mr. Piston out. And to do that, it looks like we need a 3/8 socket. You know what, let me just clean up a little bit. It's kind of chaotic around here. Okay, now we're going to use our 3/8 socket to take out the piston. So I'm just going to rotate it a little bit so I can get my socket in there. Probably should have gotten this shallow. Those bad boys are on there pretty tight. Jeez. We got one. Let's break the other one loose. Jeez, my goodness. Wow. Okay, let's see if we can fit a 3/8 ratchet in there. My apologies, it's not a 3/8 socket, it's a 5/16. So I didn't have a 5/16 3/8 socket that would fit in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a little cheater trick. I'm going to stick this on the end of the 1/4" ratchet that's short to give me extra leverage. So as long as you have one of these box wrenches, take your short ratchet, go like that, and now you have extra leverage to loosen bolts. So now both rod bolts are loose, or at least they should be at this point. They're cracked open. Loosen them up real good. Before we take the rod out, though, I would just want to see how much rock the piston has in the bore. When I said rod, I meant to disconnect everything here before we take the piston out of the bore. I want to just kind of do like a visual seat of the pants assessment, how much slop or clearance there might be between the piston and the cylinder wall. And keep in mind, I think I said this before, this is an aluminum bore block, so aluminum tends to wear pretty quickly when it's touching steel or iron rings. I think they use cast iron rings in these. But either way, obviously the rings are a lot stronger than the cylinder bore is. So you tend to see a decent amount of cylinder bore wear on these motors. It'll typically be worse near top dead center. It's not just this motor, it's any motor really that has an aluminum bore. Let's see what we feel. I don't really feel a whole lot, to be honest with you. Sometimes you get these and they wiggle, wobble back and forth. Let's take a look at the rod. Come on, focus. Focus. Really? There we go. I guess I just got to get closer. That looks pretty good. Given the frequency of oil changes and the age of this motor. I mean, there's definitely some wear for sure. It's not really, doesn't have that shiny sheen that you would expect. We'll look at the mating surface, but come on, focus. Really? Come on, Canon. You can't do it? There we go. So there's no gouging or anything. Now we might need to do, there's a lot of crap on the ridge here. A lot of carbon buildup on this ridge inside here. So we might need to sand that down, but we'll see if we can get away without it. You know what, let me just take a little bit of emery cloth and get rid of that. It's just easier that way. We don't have to fight it. Back to the sandpaper drawer. And they do make a special tool for this called a ridge reamer. But again, this is a throwaway engine. I'm not spending any money to fix this thing up or anything. Just clean it up so we can take it apart. Okay. Should be good enough. So now we just try to push the piston out from the back side. See if it's going to cooperate. Not a whole lot of room to get in there. There we go. Here she comes. You guys can see that. Very thin piston rings, wow. Gets us the way of the world these days. There's our head gasket. The reason why they use thinner piston rings is because less friction. But obviously there's not as much sealing surface area, so there's always a compromise. Come on. Might need a little persuasion with this one. Persuasion of the screwdriver coming. She's tight. There we go. We'll take a look at that. Clean up the tools a little bit. Let's see what let me clean her off in the parts cleaner and we'll take a closer look. Before we get into that, let's pop the flywheel off and just complete the disassembly. So it's a 15/16 socket. Let's see if this thing's mighty enough. Yep, no problem. So now before, you saw a couple different techniques before you saw one technique for removing stuck-on parts. Like we used that puller for the blade adapter. Let's use a different technique for this to get the flywheel off. In this technique, use an air chisel. So all you really got to do is put a little pressure on this joint here. Sometimes you can do it with your hands, we'll see. Maybe not this one. Let's get a bigger pry bar. That's stuck on there. Wow. Okay. Take two. That's how it's done. And I broke my air chisel spring. Lovely. Not the first time that's happened, sadly. That's why we can't have nice things. Ugh. Broke it clean in two. It's a return spring for the for the tools. Come on, focus. Focus. You get the idea. It's broken. Now it's time to take our valves out. They're just under this cover here. 3/8 socket. Easy peasy. Just pry that cover off. Expect to have to put a new gasket on there. Sorry, I realize this tool's in the way. This is what they look like, if the camera will focus today. Right in here. A little light in there. So we'll get a little valve spring compressor and we'll pop those keepers off. Sorry guys, I had to turn the fan on. I was getting way too hot in here. I had to cheat a little bit. My valve spring compressor tool doesn't fit here. So what I ended up doing is I popped this exhaust valve keeper out using this method. You can see the valve is sticking out here. What I ended up doing was just getting on either side of the spring with a screwdriver. You pull the spring down and you just pop the keeper out. It's a little tough to show on a video, but you can do it with 2 screwdrivers. Okay, I got both valve keepers released. So now it's just a matter of taking the valve out. So this one, this exhaust valve, is out. I can feel some stem wear on there. Yeah, there's like a ridge right there. We'll examine it closer in a minute. Let's get the intake valve out. Ooh, yuck. Caked with carbon. Gross. I do not feel a ridge on this valve, but what I'm guessing going on here is there's probably oil slipping through these aluminum valve guides, getting into the intake valve and getting burned. The owner of this engine did say it was burning some oil, so that's probably what's going on. I'll do a quick visual inspection here of the bore. Let's wipe it down. Hopefully you guys will be able to see this. Piston only contacts a certain part of the cylinder bore, and where it doesn't contact, down near the bottom of the travel, you'll be able to see that, or you should be able to see that. So, let's see, hopefully get that in view. Kind of hard to do this backwards. So for a 200 plus hour engine, it's not tragic. Let's shine a light up from below. You can hopefully see that area at the bottom that I was telling you about where the piston does not travel, and you can see that area, that's the no wear area. Everything else has some wear. Let me give it a quick fingernail test, see if we can feel any obvious wear. I mean, I can see some scratches in the bore, but do they catch a fingernail? They do not. They don't catch a gloved fingernail anyway. Let's try an ungloved one. Nope. I can feel it with the skin on my finger, but again, it does not catch a fingernail. So overall, I mean, this engine seems like it's in reasonably good shape. Let's take a look and look at the piston. It's cleaned up a bit. out. So the piston looks like it has some kind of like anti-wear coating on there, because you can see a part of the piston that never touches the bore, like right here, that's got that dark coating on there. I don't know if this is like one of those anti-stick or anti-friction coatings, or if it's just, I've never seen a piston that looks quite like this in terms of color, except in a car. Now the top ringland, or the distance between that top ring and the top of the piston, is almost like paper thin. They do that for emissions so that hydrocarbons don't get trapped in there, but you see the space between the top compression ring and the second one, top and second, much wider. And these piston rings are also paper thin. Now if we compare this to, say, I don't know, what do I have here? I'll show you a piston out of a... This is a piston and rod assembly out of a 27 horse Kawasaki engine. This is a commercial grade engine, or it was. Come on, focus. Let's try it like this. No light. There we go. You see the distance between that top ring and top ring land is quite a bit wider than this, bigger than this one. Side by side, it just eyeballing, it looks like it might be double. Looking at the rod, obviously the Kawasaki rod in my right hand is quite a bit meatier than the Briggs and Stratton rod. Granted, it's a much higher horsepower engine. This is a 5-6 horse, depending upon what day of the week it is. This is a 27 from a 27 horse, so it's beefier all around. The thrust surface on the rod here is much wider too than here on the Briggs and Stratton. The bearing surface is obviously much greater on the big end of the rod, in here and in here. So I mean, yeah, you see some obvious construction differences, but you'd expect that. This is probably from a $2,000 engine. This is probably from a $200 engine, if that, maybe $150. So in terms of value, I mean, this Briggs and Stratton seems like it's pretty decent. The rod manufacturing quality is nowhere near that of the Kawasaki. You can see some of the casting marks there. I don't know if there was some air in the casting or what, but you can see some pitting right there. The Kawasaki looks quite a bit nicer, just better overall. This one got pulled because it took a hit right there. But other than that, that obviously wouldn't come from the factory. And when I say took a hit, it contacted something. This engine was nearly destroyed. Also, the small end of the rod, notice here it's almost the full width of the wrist pin. See there, whereas the Briggs and Stratton tapers for whatever reason. But overall, I mean, considering this is a 200-hour engine with 200 hours on it, it doesn't look all that bad. I mean, just like that anti-wear coating on the piston skirt. Come on, focus. Like right along here is a bit worn off, as it is here. The rings are all loose, they're not stuck, but you can tell this engine was definitely burning some oil by just what's on the piston crown here. And what's on the back of the intake valve, if I can find it. Here we go. So that kind of matches what we're seeing on the crown. Icky stuff. Let's take a look at the crank. Let me wipe it down a little bit. So just looking at the magneto side journal, or where the coil and flywheel are, I don't see any appreciable signs of wear. It's a very, very minor mark, let's call it a mark, where the seal rides. It doesn't catch a nail. I mean, you can't feel it at all. The PTO side, or power takeoff side, looks perfect as well. I'm not going to measure any of this stuff. I mean, it's just kind of silly. We're not going to use this engine. But just visually, everything looks to be nearly perfect. I don't see any signs of a aluminum transfer on the rod journal. So this looks like a serviceable part just from looking at it. Nice manufacturing process too. You can see here there's some really nice fillets on the rod journal right there and on this side. So yeah, serviceable part. Alright, what else do we need to look at? Let's look at the valve faces. I'll have to clean them up to do that. Let me wire wheel them off and then we'll take a closer look. Okay, closer look at the valves. I cleaned up the sealing surface. I don't see any signs of pitting, or I guess very, very, very minor signs of pitting on the exhaust valve sealing surface here, where it contacts the seat and the cylinder head. If I had to give it a score, I would say the wear score is maybe a 1 or a 2 out of 10, 10 being the worst, 1 being the best. Looking at the intake valve. Come on, focus. Hopefully that's focused, sort of. Again, no obvious signs of wear there. I don't see any pitting. And feeling the valve stem, I don't feel any grooves. The exhaust valve does have something very noticeable right about here. I'll see if that comes off with the wire wheel. Yeah, that just ended up being debris, so I don't feel it anymore now that I've cleaned up the valve on the wire wheel. So these valves are in good shape. They just need a little bit further cleaning. Again, going back to, let's look at the inside. Now, down here, this is one of the other thrust bearings inside the block. There is some galling on this one. So I don't know what's causing that. So I mean, is it serviceable? Yes, but it's not in the greatest of shape. Let's look at that mag side bearing in the block, clean it out a little bit. And these things are notorious for failing on a lot of different engines, primarily because they don't get a lot of lubrication. Because gravity doesn't put a lot of oil there. I don't see any obvious lubrication issues there though. Looks fine. The cam bearing in the block looks fine. And here you can kind of get a better view of hopefully you can, what I was talking about in the bore. Notice right down here, this is the factory finish. That shiny area down at the bottom, maybe the bottom 1.5 inches. And higher up is where the piston was traveling. Let's get a little bit light in there. Hopefully that makes it easier to see. If you focus, there you go. Stay focused. There we go. So again, I'm not going to mic the bore or anything, but it's probably serviceable. Can we see the valve guides at all? Not too well. Let me shine a light up from below and see if I can see anything in there. Not really. Let's put valves back in there and see if we can feel any wobbling. Oh yeah. There is plenty of guide clearance there. Jeez, that's our problem. That's why this thing was burning oil. That's the exhaust. Let's check the intake. Is there a seal on this? I don't feel a seal. I would say there's probably less guide wear on the intake side, but there's definitely some. I also didn't clean up the stem too well of this valve. Let me wire wheel it. intake valve actually doesn't feel that bad, quite honestly. It's all on the exhaust side. So that was barely weeble wobbling. This one's all over the place. All right, I think that might be it. Oh wait, you gotta look at the bottom bearing, PTO bearing in the sump. That's an important one. This thing sees a lot of abuse. All right, so the sump, we can see here, we have a thrust bearing here, thrust bearing here. They look fine. I don't feel nothing catches a fingernail on those. Looking at the PTO bearing itself, let's get a flashlight. There's some scratching in there, but it doesn't look tragic. Nothing really catches your finger at all. So I would say that's serviceable, but definitely not perfect. Overall, this engine is not in horrible shape. It definitely has some hours on it. It's definitely near the end of its useful life based upon a number of factors. Primarily the exhaust valve guide wear. I don't think this engine has replaceable valve guides. I didn't measure the ring end gap. I probably could do that, but I mean, that takes a little bit of work. Quite honestly, I just don't feel like doing it. But I would guess that the bore is probably worn more than the rings, because again, these are metal, like these are either cast iron or steel, I can't remember, and the bore is aluminum. So the bore is going to wear faster than the rings. And like we said, just by visual inspection, the bore doesn't look tragic. It's not in the greatest of shape either, but for 200 hours, and that's its design life, it's not too bad considering. Crank looks immaculate. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this teardown of a Briggs and Stratton Quantum that is at the end of its design life. Still obviously would still run if it had a carburetor, but just not worth repairing, not worth buying a carburetor for an engine this old with this many hours on it. So hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please subscribe and stay safe.